David Hyde Pierce was a mainstay of prime-time television for more than 10 years. In addition to being an award-winning performance, his depiction of Niles Crane on Frasier earned him 4 Emmys and cemented his place in popular culture. Then, almost without warning, he was no longer in the public eye. Nothing big or scandalous, just a small step back. Whether it was burnout, a personal choice, or something going on behind the scenes, fans were left wondering. Pierce was already heading in a new direction as the cameras stopped filming, one that had little to do with Hollywood. What then pulled him away from the spotlight? Why hasn't he come back? Watch this space to discover out. David Pierce was born in Saratoga Springs, New York, and will always be known as the sardonic, neurotic Niles Crane from Frasier. In order to prevent confusion with another actor named David Pierce, he later added Hyde to his name. However, his artistic journey began much earlier. He was already displaying artistic talent as a child. He spent the summers at Camp Kababayun, an all-boys camp, where he not only performed in Gilbert and Sullivan plays but also directed them, including a production of HMS Pinhor. He also played the organ at Bethesda Episcopal Church. Following his high school graduation in 1977, Pierce enrolled at Yale University. He began as a music major who concentrated on playing the piano. However, his interests changed over time. His decision to double major in theater studies and English literature was a reflection of his developing love for the theater. Pierce was quite active in Yale's campus theater. He led the Yale Gilbert and Sullivan Society's performance of Princess Ida, in addition to acting and directing it. After graduating with a Bachelor of Arts in 1981, he left behind a legacy of exceptional performances, in addition to his diploma. After receiving his degree, Pierce relocated to New York City and worked at a variety of survival jobs, including security guard and tie sales at Bloomingdale's, all the while pursuing acting training at Michael Howard Studios. In this early period of his career, he was cast alongside Kevin Kline as Laertes in an off-Broadway Hamlet production. Additionally, he debuted on Broadway in Christopher During's comedy, Beyond Therapy in 1982. With Norman Lear's political comic, The Powers That Be, he made his television debut. Pierce portrayed a sad congressman named Theodore Van Horn in that program, who eventually falls in love with the maid. This strangely recognizable scene would recur again in Frasier, when Pierce's character Niles had feelings for Daphne, the live and physical therapist. It's interesting to note that a brother role was never intended for Frasier. Cheers. At first, Frasier was seen as an only kid. The idea for Niles was later developed after a casting assistant saw how much David Hyde Pierce resembled a young Kelsey Grammer. The producers were sufficiently intrigued by the likeness. Pierce was invited to join them. They discussed the identity of this brother for almost an hour, despite the fact that there was no script yet, suggesting, for example, that Frasier was a Freudian and Niles was a Jungian. Frasier, a spin-off from the popular sitcom Cheers, debuted on television on NBC on September 16, 1993, shortly after they gave him the role. The focal point of the program was Kelsey Grammer's character, Frasier Crane, a radio psychiatrist who had already gained popularity among viewers during his time on Cheers. Frasier moved to Seattle, Washington, to begin a fresh chapter with his character after he left Boston. The spin-off swiftly established its own personality, despite being based on a well-known character. Frasier, who was more akin to a British comedy than a standard American sitcom, leaned on wit, sophistication, and a much drier sense of humor, whereas Cheers glorified the lives of regular working-class bar patrons. Frasier Crane's character on Cheers had a quite narrow first goal. He was intended to be Diane Chambers' Shelley Long, short-term romantic lover, in order to cause friction with her former partner, Sam Malone Ted Danson. However, Frasier was so well received by viewers that the writers decided to make him a series regular, even after Long left. Frasier had developed into such a distinctive character by the end of Cheers that a solo series seemed like the logical next step. But Frasier was more than a continuation. A reinvention took place. In an attempt to move on from the past, the new show filed for a divorce from Frasier's wife and gave her exclusive custody of their kid Frederick. This narrative choice allowed the spin-off to create a new world centered on Frasier without having to rely on the Cheers ensemble. Frasier's life was rebuilt in Seattle with a fresh group of vibrant personalities. The most important of these were their father, Martin Crane, played by John Mahoney, and his younger brother, Niles Crane, played by David Hyde Pierce. The show was built around their family dynamic. After a hip accident left him in need of care, Martin, a retired police investigator with a direct no-nonsense demeanor, moved in with Frasier. A comic confrontation resulted from this arrangement right away. As a sophisticated neurotic thinker, Frasier was always at odds with his father's more realistic and grounded view of the world. Martin wasn't the only one that moved in. Eddie, the unkempt dog he brought with him, soon became a continual source of trouble for Frasier. Cheers. At first, Frasier was seen as an only kid. The idea for Niles was later developed after a casting assistant saw how much David Hyde Pierce resembled a young Kelsey Grammer. The producers were sufficiently intrigued by the likeness. Pierce was invited to join them. They discussed the identity of this brother for almost an hour, despite the fact that there was no script yet, suggesting, for example, that Frasier was a Freudian and Niles was a Jungian. Frasier, a spin-off from the popular sitcom Cheers, debuted on television on NBC on September 16, 1993, shortly after they gave him the role. The focal point of the program was Kelsey Grammer's character, Frasier Crane, a radio psychiatrist who had already gained popularity among viewers during his time on Cheers. Frasier moved to Seattle, Washington, to begin a fresh chapter with his character after he left Boston. The spin-off swiftly established its own personality, despite being based on a well-known character. Frasier, who was more akin to a British comedy than a standard American sitcom, leaned on wit, sophistication, and a much drier sense of humor, whereas Cheers glorified the lives of regular working-class bar patrons. Frasier Crane's character on Cheers had a quite narrow first goal. He was intended to be Diane Chambers' Shelley Long, short-term romantic lover, in order to cause friction with her former partner, Sam Malone Ted Danson. However, Frasier was so well received by viewers that the writers decided to make him a series regular, even after Long left. Frasier had developed into such a distinctive character by the end of Cheers that a solo series seemed like the logical next step. But Frasier was more than a continuation. A reinvention took place. In an attempt to move on from the past, the new show filed for a divorce from Frasier's wife and gave her exclusive custody of their kid Frederick. This narrative choice allowed the spin-off to create a new world centered on Frasier without having to rely on the Cheers ensemble. Frasier's life was rebuilt in Seattle, with a fresh group of vibrant personalities. The most important of these were their father, Martin Crane, played by John Mahoney, and his younger brother, Niles Crane, played by David Hyde Pierce. The show was built around their family dynamic. After a hip accident left him in need of care, Martin, a retired police investigator with a direct, no-nonsense demeanor, moved in with Frasier. A comic confrontation resulted from this arrangement right away. As a sophisticated neurotic thinker, Frasier was always at odds with his father's more realistic and grounded view of the world. Martin wasn't the only one that moved in. Eddie, the unkempt dog he brought with him, soon became a continual source of trouble for Frasier. Pierce took up the character of Sir Robin, which Idol himself had previously performed, sharing the stage with giants like Tim Curry, Sarah Ramirez, and Hank Azaria. Pierce handled the daring leap like a seasoned pro. It could have gone any way for someone who had just finished 11 years of a popular TV sitcom. Pierce, however, did more than simply hold his own. He demonstrated his belonging. He contributed genuine stage presence, powerful vocals, and humorous timing. It signaled the start of a new era in which theater would go beyond a side gig. It turned to become his second act. A year later, he was cast in the lead role of Curtains, a musical mystery comedy written by Rupert Holmes and featuring music by the renowned Chicago film crew Kander and Ebb. Pierce portrayed investigator Frank Chaffee in Curtains, who aspired to be a Broadway star. Although reviews for the musical were varied, Pierce's performance was particularly noteworthy. He was praised by critics as the show's main character, and the New York Times referred to his performance as a Broadway breakthrough. His comedic flair was evident, and he had a terrific theatrical relationship with co-stars Deborah Monk and Frasier alum Edward Hibbert. This job was more than just a victory. Pierce's reputation as a theater star was cemented by it. His personal life, which he had kept meticulously secret during Frasier's run, naturally came into focus as his stage profile rose. He avoided dating-related queries in early interviews, which sparked conjecture. Additionally, Pierce discreetly acknowledged in 2007 that he was in a committed relationship with producer and writer Brian Hargrove. There wasn't a big disclosure. Instead, his partner was mentioned in passing in a CNN piece about his life. In a spontaneous and sincere moment, he publicly acknowledged Hargrove at his Tony Award acceptance speech for Curtains that same year. He then clarified that even he had initially been unaware of his sexual orientation. He didn't know he was gay when he first met Hargrove, They were just great pals. They got married in October 2008, right before California temporarily outlawed same-sex unions. Pierce was conflicted about the moment. He was happy that their marriage was acknowledged, but yet disturbed by the message of the law. His peaceful personal life abruptly became entangled with politics. Additionally, he became an outspoken supporter of LGBTQ+ rights for the first time. Pice, who felt that visibility mattered, started speaking out publicly because he was no longer satisfied to let his private life speak for itself. He admitted that it felt dishonest to remain silent because of his fame. His support grew over time to include LGBTQ+ rights. He became the national spokesperson for the Alzheimer's Association in 2007, the same year he came out, a subject that is very close to his heart. During interviews, he spoke candidly about the illness, a condition that gradually destroys your brain, and it doesn't stop until it kills you. He testified before Congress, encouraging politicians to treat Alzheimer's as seriously as any other important public health concern, because he was so passionate about the topic. It was more than just lobbying for Pierce. Family was involved. Long before Alzheimer's was widely recognized, in the 1980s, his grandfather had been afflicted with the condition. His grandfather's inability to read the menu during a family meal was the first indication that something was amiss. The deterioration was harsh and gradual after that. He used to be a peaceful man who played chess, but his personality changed, and it was almost impossible to take care of him. George, Pierce's father, had a stroke and developed a different type of dementia. He was raised by his mother until her death in 1995, which Pice ascribed in part to the strain of providing care. Only a few years later, his father passed away. Those encounters had a profound effect, and presence at a memory walk swiftly turned into a lifetime dedication to Alzheimer's activism. He helped bring Alzheimer's into the public eye by being an outspoken advocate for the National Alzheimer's Project Act. At the 2010 Tony Awards, Pierce gave an emotional speech in which he accepted the Isabel Stevenson Award. In it, he mused on the frailty of memory itself and vowed to never forget that night or the cause. Pierce continued to work in theater and movies despite his increasing activism. He played Warwick, an apparently sophisticated man who turns the tables on a house invader, in the dark comedy The Perfect Host, which he starred in 2010. Critics disagreed. Although Pice's eerie multi-layered performance was widely lauded, the movie itself received flack for its illogical and overly convoluted premise. At about the same time, he made a comeback to the theater, performing in the London and New York revivals of Labette. Then, with Brian Hargrove's musical It Should Have Been You, he made his directing debut. After its 2011 debut, the show finally had its Broadway debut in 2015. The show, which starred Tyne Daly, received mixed reviews. Some thought it was a little too traditional, while others commended it for its heart and comedy. In 2015, he returned with another off-Broadway show, Ripcord, which was praised for its lighthearted, sitcom-like elements. Next came When We Rise, a 2017 ABC miniseries that followed activist Cleve Jones as she documented the LGBTQ+ rights struggle. Pierce portrayed Jones's father, a traditionalist physician who finds it difficult to embrace his son's identity. Pierce accepted the multi-layered, significant role because he wanted to demonstrate the complexity and humanity of that type of parent. It's interesting to note that Cleve Jones asked Pierce to portray the role. It turned out that his father had loved the actor who portrayed Niles and had been a fan of Frasier. Pierce also appeared in The Good Wife and returned to the character in the cult comedy Wet Hot American Summer in 2017. However, Pierce continued to be a reluctant celebrity despite his on-screen persona. He acknowledged that celebrity never really suited him in an interview that same year. At the beginning of his career, a tabloid posed as the Boston Globe and conned his mother into doing an interview. Photographers once concealed in trees to take pictures of him strolling his dog. Those encounters had an impact. Pierce, in contrast to many in Hollywood, never sought attention. All he wanted to do was act. And he was able to accomplish that on his own terms because of Frasier's success. The world was about to see a tragedy that would put a halt to everything, both on and off the stage, while he was still forging his own peaceful way. The CO-19 epidemic in 2020 brought the globe to a complete standstill, and the entertainment sector was no exception. Broadway closed, movie sets were silent, and artists all around the world were left in a state of uncertainty. It turned into more than just a work break for David Hyde Pierce. It was a really intimate period of introspection. while trying to make sense of a world that had been completely upended, particularly the loss of his parents, while he was alone at home with his husband, Brian. But he also rediscovered the important things in that silence. That feeling of direction drew him back to his origins. He participated in a virtual fundraising for the Actors Fund, alongside his Frasier co-stars, as a way to give back and celebrate their reunion. Then there was an unannounced comeback to TV. In the HBO Max drama, Julia, Pierce returned to the public eye in 2022 as Paul Child, the husband of renowned chef Julia Child. He was given the post at the perfect moment, previously cast, but retracted due to a Broadway opportunity. After the epidemic forced the cancellation of the theatrical show, he returned to the project. Only a few days after production began, the show was abruptly shut off, despite Joan Cusack and Tom Hollander having been originally cast as Julia and Paul. When Hollander left and Sarah Lanasher took Cusack's position, Pierce was able to take over. The turn was fortunate. Pice was captivated by the story from the first time he read the script. He was captivated by Paul Child's personality, a Renaissance man who loved wine, gastronomy, and architecture, painted, played the violin, studied judo, and made furniture. Pierce admired Paul's support of Julia during her ascent to stardom, a quiet strength uncommon in males of that time. Pierce found personal resonance in it, as it mirrored his own experiences of support and collaboration. Despite Julia's brief two-season tenure, Pice's performance was widely praised. He had the opportunity to portray a different part of himself on TV, as the drama delves into a deep, character-driven plot that emphasized mature relationships and nuanced personalities. In 2023, over 20 years after the series' conclusion, Frasier fans were ecstatic to learn that it would be returning. However, something was lacking. Frasier's adored younger brother, Niles Crane, was not coming back. Many viewers were left wondering why David Hyde Pierce decided not to reprise his legendary role when the revival brought new characters in a different context. It turned out that the solution was straightforward. In addition to working on other projects, such as the musical Here We Are, which starred Dennis O'Hare and Bobby Cannavale, Pierce had already committed to Julia. In open interviews, Pice clarified that his choice had nothing to do with rejecting the show or turning away from Niles. He had enjoyed his time on Frasier to the fullest. However, he was more interested in taking on fresh creative challenges at this point in his career. He believed that his participation was not necessary for the reboot to be successful. He felt that, like the original when it split off from Cheers, Frasier could and maybe should change into something else. He wanted to respect what the series' character had meant to him, and leave Niles where he was, not because he was uninterested. Returning as Frasier Crane, Kelsey Grammer affirmed that Pice's choice was well considered. Reuniting the entire historic cast, Pierce, Jane Leeves, Perry Gilpin, and the late John Mahoney, was not as successful as the producers had planned. Grammer seized the chance to introduce Frasier's third act, placing the character in a new place with new people who had fresh tales to share. Even though Niles was not there, his influence could still be felt through Anders Keith's portrayal of David Crane, his and Daphne's son. The family rivalry that characterized so much of the original series was conspicuously absent. However, a number of well-known characters, such as Rose and Lilith, made cameos. Pice hasn't entirely shut the door, though. He has stated that he is open to the possibility of making a guest appearance, if the appropriate opportunity arises. Even though he does not wish to return as a series regular, Grammer concurs, stating that Pierce is welcome to return at any time.